you were to retrace the origins of bad blood between Republicans and Democrats over the past 35 years, it may in fact lead to ballot boxes from southwestern Indiana in the mid-1980s. Two men vying for the same seat and Congress, waiting months for the results. It's a race that has defined recounts in the future and the object of Tommy Mason's latest installment of Tri-State Treasures.
In the 1984 presidential election, no recounts or appeals were needed as Ronald Reagan soundly defeated his Democratic challenger Walter Mondale by a wide margin. Reagan only lost one state, but it's what occurred in Gibson County that led to several frustrating months for Indiana election officials and those waiting for the head count in Washington. Local historian Stan Schmidt says the congressional seat held by Democrat Frank McCloskey had always brought on spirited battles in each of the previous 5 elections.
In 10 years, there had been 5 different congressmen in the 8th district there. It had gotten the nickname the Bloody Eighth because of the change of representatives here.
Initially, the votes would swing in favor of the incumbent Frank McCloskey by 111 votes. Then came news out of Gibson County that 2 precincts had been counted twice. Election officials would eventually determine that out of 233,000 ballots cast, that it was Republican Rick McIntyre that had won by just 34 votes. Those results would be certified by the Indiana Secretary of State. But by January, Democrats in the House put a quick stop to any swearing-in ceremony for the freshman McIntyre.
McIntyre goes to Congress, and the House, which was democratically controlled at the time, refused to seat him. What they did do is the House created its own task force to come back to Indiana and to go through all the election results.
With the absence of a clear winner and the temporary vacancy of the representative seat, some even tried to introduce a bill that would make Hoosiers within the 8th district exempt from income tax since they were not being represented on the federal level. However, the battle had just begun as election officials from Washington converged on southern Indiana election offices. 4 months later, in May, the House task force, consisting of 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, agreed that Frank McCloskey was the outright winner by a 4-ballot majority. It's still the closest election in Indiana and one of the closest in the country. So McCloskey gets the seat, but not without pushback from the opposition.
Then on May 1st, and this is after the November election, finally Frank McCloskey was seated as the 8th District Congressman. And the partisanship at the time there, the way this whole thing had gone on, when he was seated, the entire Republican House walked out.
Republican Pat Robertson of Kansas was one of the most vocal critics on the House floor, foreshadowing decades of bad blood.
This wound will not heal without a terrible price and a scar that will be with this House for many years. In baseball terms, those are the kind of folks who call for their pitcher to stick it in the batter's ear. And the unmitigated gall.
Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill tried to move on with the swearing in of McCloskey, but Republicans had other plans.
What purpose does the gentleman rise?
The Speaker, in view of that vote, the last vote, I move we adjourn.
Would the gentleman withhold until I have an opportunity to swear in Mr. Frank McCloskey?
No, Mr. Speaker, the purpose...
Well, I understand that the gentleman
is to adjourn
pressing
immediately in keeping with the precedent of the Democratic Party back in 1890.
No.
Eventually, McCloskey would be sworn in.
Mr. Frank McCloskey will raise his right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic?
Some have linked the episode to what could be considered a prelude to today's polarizing political climate.